Hey, Cloudcast community, listen up. Today's show is sponsored by Datadog, a cloud-scale monitoring and analytics platform. Datadog was built to bring clarity to complex, dynamic applications, whether they're in the cloud, on-prem, in containers, or wherever you run your applications. With powerful dashboards, seamless integrations, and more than 250 technologies they can monitor, Datadog has you covered. Whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google services, your popular open source projects and products, or web security and APIs, Datadog can help you monitor them and help you collaborate around troubleshooting them and make sure they're running great. Datadog provides deep end-to-end visibility into the health and performance of modern applications. So, try it yourself. Get yourself a free 14-day trial. Go to datadoghq.com/cloudcast. That's datadoghq.com/cloudcast to try out your free 14-day trial. And if you try it out, let them know your friends at Cloudcast sent you, and they'll send you a great, wonderful, soft, awesome t-shirt with the Datadog logo on it. I wear mine all the time. So once again, that's datadoghq.com/cloudcast. Thanks for listening, and here comes the show.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Today's going to be sort of a unique show. We're going to call it sort of a special edition AWS reInvent show. I've never really done one of these before, but, for myself, I kind of did some homework the last couple of days. I didn't get a chance to attend the event in Las Vegas. Aaron did. He's still traveling back. But I kind of did some homework. I had to kind of figure out what were all the things that got announced. So I figured I would take the homework that I had done over the last couple of days and just turn it into a show. So this is going to be a lot of me talking, for a very long time. Hopefully it does not go 2.5 hours like the normal AWS keynote does, but, kind of the way that the Foo Fighters often will bring up a kid to play guitar for a song just because somebody's tired or something. I figure this is a good exercise for me to figure out that if for some reason something happened to Andy Jassy during the keynote, if I could just jump up on stage and do the keynote for him. So with that, I kind of went through all of the announcements from AWS reInvent, kind of categorized them. And what we're going to try and do is sort of put them all together, categorize them, do a quick summary of them. For the ones that maybe are really important, we'll cover those as well. And just kind of provide some insight into what's going on. So with that, the first thing that I sort of noticed as I was looking at their roadmap and I was thinking about all the different things that Amazon announces, I kind of put them into 5 buckets. And these aren't technology buckets. They're sort of like, how do they do their roadmap? So if you're trying to figure out, hey, what might be coming next year, or if you work for a vendor or a channel partner or an SI or something, and you're trying to figure out, will Amazon compete with me? These are maybe some buckets for you to consider. So I think the first bucket in terms of the roadmap is really kind of the classic sort of retail approach, which is Amazon saying, hey, we're going to make sure that we have every size, color, shape, and form for any given thing. And I think we've seen that for a long time with things like EC2, all the different sizes and formats. Some of the databases we see, we see that with some of the load balancing technologies that are out there. So that's one bucket. The second bucket, I think, is the one where, because Amazon is able to have some insight into what customers are doing, especially up in the public cloud, in the centralized cloud, they eventually start to see patterns emerge, and they start to turn those into what I'll call sort of solutions. So customers typically use A, B, and C in certain patterns. Let's turn that into one specific thing. And something like Amazon Aurora with the database, where the database gets backed up and the database gets replicated. People figure out the IOPS to go with the database. Like that's kind of an example of a solution. The next one is and this is becoming more of a thing that they're trying to do, is around the customer who says, I want the functionality, but I don't know how much I need, or I don't know how to size it. And we're seeing more and more of that. We see that with databases now. We're seeing that with load balancers. We're seeing that with some of the serverless type of things. Maybe not the programming side of serverless, but I don't want to run my servers side of serverless, things like Fargate and others. That's sort of the third bucket of stuff that we see. So, if you have a technology that sounds cool, but it's really hard to size, Amazon's trying to apply some, intelligence, automated intelligence to try and help customers with that and make them not have to provision it up front. The fourth bucket I have is sort of what I'll call if I'm a customer, what thing do we hate about the big vendor that we use and pay a lot of money to? So that could be, an Oracle, a Splunk, a VMware, whoever, right? And I'm not picking on any of those vendors, just sort of grab those because I think they get called out this year. And Amazon will often go, oh, okay, well, we could do a similar type of feature, maybe at a cheaper price point, or maybe it's we take the problem that everybody hates and we automate it in some way so you don't have to hate it as much. So that's the fourth bucket. And then the last bucket, and this is beginning to emerge more and more, is not a Amazon, the IT vendor thing, but or AWS, the IT vendor thing, but sort of Amazon, a company, saying, hey, we are going to be the first customer of some technology because we are going to get into that business. And the number of businesses that Amazon obviously is now in, way beyond books and other things, from grocery stores to package delivery to, a lot of different stuff. And I'll put some things in the show notes. They often become customer one. And we'll see a few things that get announced this year where it seems pretty obvious that Amazon is sort of customer one of this. And then at some point, Amazon said, oh, well, you know what? There are probably some people that will compete with us in that space, or maybe they're in the incumbent and we do the technology better than they do. And we can start making some money off of them using our services on the back end. So anyways, with that, we're going to go through a lot of announcements. I think there's over 40 announcements. So buckle in. Hopefully, maybe you're going on a long car ride or something. We're going to just kind of go through them, group them into different buckets, and maybe you'll like certain buckets and other buckets you may not care about. So the first bucket I've got is infrastructure. And I'm going to run through a lot of these. Some I just hit the announcements and some will kind of get into them. The first one was the announcement of the GovCloud for US East. I was sort of surprised by this. I actually thought the GovCloud was in US East, sort of around Washington, D.C. It was actually out on the West Coast, but there's now an East Coast GovCloud. Something called Route 53 for Route 53 Resolver. So that's the DNS service for hybrid clouds. And essentially, this allows Route 53 DNS to resolve to both things in what I'll call the centralized cloud. And then we're going to talk about sort of outposts, or what are going to be the private cloud or on-prem clouds for AWS. So basically a DNS resolver that will help for, multi-cloud environments. So everything doesn't have to be in the centralized AWS cloud. The next one is what's called AWS Global Accelerator. Think about this as a way to use the Content Delivery Network, the CDN, in conjunction with the AWS backbone. So just a faster way to get traffic that has to be global, application and data that has to be global. It's a more intelligent way of routing it around the globe and getting it there faster. And the last one is what's called AWS Transit Gateways. And the simplest way to think about this is if you've used VPCs have always been point-to-point in the past. AWS Transit Gateway is a way to do hub and spoke for VPCs. And again, obviously, this will come into play as we get into an announcement that Amazon's going to make called Outpost, which we'll talk about. You're probably now going to think about AWS as sort of the centralized cloud, and then there will be Outposts, which will be the remote clouds, if you will. So the other thing, and I have absolutely no explanation for this, would love to know why. I don't know why some of the services are called AWS blah service and others are called Amazon blah service. So I'm not sure what the thinking is there. I don't know if it's because it originated as Amazon was the original customer or what the naming logic is. So if some are called Amazon, some are called AWS, I don't know why they're different. All right, moving on to the compute section. There are a number of things in the compute area that were announced. First one is EC2 predictive scaling. So Amazon has always had elastic load balancers and application load balancers. They were great ways to do load balancing, but you had to do some tuning. Now we're seeing, AI, artificial intelligence, applied to EC2 scaling. So sort of not necessarily a replacement for load balancers, but more intelligence around how you're going to scale up your predictions of what you're doing for EC2, for compute instance. A couple of new compute instances. One was the A1 compute instance, which are based on ARM processors, and the C5N compute instance, which are 100 gigabit networking instances. So very large for big high bandwidth use cases, and then for the ARM use cases as well. EC2 instances can now be hibernated. So, the memory state that was in it can sort of be hibernated as opposed to just spinning up a new instance. You can sort of get that instance memory state back into somewhere wherever you need it. Snowball Edge, so the edge device that originally was just for storage to be able to ship storage back up to the cloud, eventually got compute in it, got things like Greengrass to do Lambda, now has more compute and more and has GPUs in it. So, the on-premise footprint that can be used for AWS is continuing to expand with Snowball. And the next one on the list is something called AWS Firecracker, which is actually an open source project. This is a very, very lightweight VM. It's based on the KVM technology, but it's very, very lightweight VM. It's some of the technology that's used for some of the isolation in things like Fargate for isolating containers. This will be an interesting one because, again, it's a open source project as opposed to also being technology that Amazon uses under the covers. And then finally, in the compute space, Amazon announced something that I've mentioned a couple times already called Amazon Outposts. This is the thing that a lot of people have been wondering about forever. Will Amazon ever build a on-premises or private cloud product? This is a managed instance. Amazon sells it in two flavors. Both of them, you buy the hardware from Amazon, not sort of third-party, Dell, HP, Cisco, Lenovo. You are buying the hardware, server hardware and storage hardware from Amazon. And it comes in one of two flavors. You can either buy managed Amazon services with Amazon APIs, or you can buy managed VMware, sort of VMware on AWS with VMware APIs. So probably go into more detail on this somewhere in a later episode because obviously this impacts the IT industry in a big way. But details around this are very, very thin. No pricing details are announced. No availability dates are announced. Number of services that will be available on that hasn't been announced. But definitely something different in terms of Amazon finally admitting or accepting that there is a marketplace for customers who have applications that have to run within their own facilities, and there'll be potentially lots of use cases of this as an edge cloud as well. Okay, moving out of compute into storage. The first on the list for storage was something called AWS Data Sync, which is fast and automated data transfer. So think of this as, kind of a backup as a service, which will probably eventually evolve into sort of a DR as a service type of thing. And you can imagine that this would be something that would definitely be at some point embedded into the Outposts technology. But, definitely something where I'm sure Amazon is hearing from customers that, they have data on premises that they want to back up into the cloud, and they would love to, get out of the business of, buying backup appliances and backup software and stuff. So if Amazon could embed that technology, that would be great. So that is Amazon Data Sync. And again, for those of you that are deep in the storage world and want to let me know that, it doesn't do lots of other stuff that other fancy backup things do, that's cool. Go dig into the details and figure out which features are there and which ones aren't, and figure out which works for you. Next one is a pretty simple thing, managed SFTP service. So for those of you that do a lot of SFTP stuff, having to transfer files, managed service is available from AWS. And then the last one seems like a pretty interesting thing that is a concept that's been around the storage industry for a long time. It's S3 cost optimization with automated tiering. So for anybody who's been around the storage industry for a long time, lots of vendors have done this where they will have like memory, SSD disks, and then maybe some cheap and deep set of disk storage that'll be on like a big storage array, for example, and they'd be able to migrate hot data and cold data and so forth dynamically within the platform. This is in essence doing this with S3. The big difference, of course, being with S3, there are some significant price differences. I guess this would be the same with SANs as well between SSD and disks. But it will try and do some automated tiering and movement of data between, say, like S3 and some of the lower usage, less frequently accessed tiers, and then potentially all the way out to Glacier and so forth. So just a way for you to continue to keep putting data into S3 and them helping you try and optimize the cost point based on usage and availability. Okay, as we move out of storage, a couple of new announcements that are sort of related to storage in file systems. So Amazon came out with something called FXS. So Frank Xerox SAM, FXS, for Windows File Server. So managed Windows File Server systems, being able to, if you don't want to manage those Windows File Servers anymore out of Windows servers, you can now do that through AWS. And also another FXS, but this time for Lustre, for the open source project around search. For Lustre, both of those file systems are now available as managed services from AWS. Okay, moving out of file systems and storage into databases. A couple of things around DynamoDB. DynamoDB always was sort of a NoSQL type of database, huge, NoSQL database. Now supports transactions. So this probably a big space where Amazon's going after more and more of the database space for Oracle, and they did a huge talk about how they had moved themselves off of Oracle databases onto Amazon DB, which is their own homegrown technology, and then kind of a lot in Werner's keynote about how they had migrated these transactional databases, Oracle databases, over into DynamoDB. So DynamoDB now has transactions. DynamoDB also is now an on-demand service. So on-demand in the sense of more and more like we're seeing a lot of the Amazon services where they are more serverless-like in terms of you don't have to think about planning for IOPS. You don't necessarily have to plan for some of the sharding and other scaling types of parameters. So the on-demand nature of that is now available for DynamoDB. Previously, was available for things like Aurora DB. Next one on the list is called Amazon Forecast, which is essentially time series forecasting. So some forecasting technology embedded into time series databases. So if you're in the time series database space and you want some additional automation or intelligence built in to help you forecast what might be coming in your time series, that is now an available service. And then the last one, and I don't know if this totally fits into databases, but I'm throwing it in here anyways. For the Kinesis service, the streaming service, there's now data analytics for Java applications. So if you are a Java developer, maybe you're in the Spring world, Spring Cloud, Spring Boot world, and maybe you're doing streaming services like Kinesis, there are now data analytics capabilities for Java applications. All right, moving along. 15 minutes along. We got a little ways to go. In the account management space, so you need to manage your AWS accounts. You want to manage them well. A bunch of things that were announced. And this is not only just account management, but also kind of think of this as more something that's applicable to enterprise architects and systems architects and so on and so forth. The first one is called AWS Resource Access Manager, and this is all about cross-account sharing. So as AWS is managed and mentioned, and for anybody who's really dealt with large organizations that work with AWS. In some cases, you're going to have centralized resources and centralized billing and centralized provisioning. In other cases, you're going to have lines of business or groups that will do their own. And in some cases, it made sense to keep them completely isolated because you could let an individual business unit manage their own pricing, their own budgets and so forth. But there are going to be some situations where you may want to do some cross-sharing. So there is now the ability to, within a broader organization and sub-organizations, to have cross-resource sharing using the Resource Access Manager. Next thing is in the Amazon Marketplace, which has been around for a while, now support for private marketplaces and a whole bunch of ability to customize private marketplaces. So you can imagine whether you are an individual organization who wants to have a bunch of your own applications in there, you want to scope it and put your own branding, colors, and logos on there. Or maybe you are a service provider that says, hey, we want to get out of the facilities business and we just simply want to, build on top of AWS. We can use their private marketplaces. So that's available. CloudWatch Log Insight is now a service that's available through CloudWatch Logs. I suspect this is one that's sort of going after something like Splunk or some of the other newer observability type of companies that are out there. So CloudWatch Logs now has deeper insight into what's going on. So some analytics around what's happening in your logs. Something called AWS Cloud Maps is now available. This is really, think of it as kind of blueprinting or mapping visually your applications. So your ability to say this complex set of interconnections and so forth, we can create a map for that. And then obviously you'll be able to visualize that and be able to move things around within those maps and map things to maps. And then finally, the last one was, AWS has had this thing for a while called, well architected, concept called well architected, and they were kind of trying to teach you best practices. Now there's actually an automated tool that will take your application, which was probably designed, if you're trying to design it around the well-architected principles, will now look at it and say, okay, how far off are you from what AWS recommends as best practices versus what you may have built, and try and make some recommendations to you. So definitely something that enterprise architects would want to take a look at. And the last one, pretty simple tool, AWS License Manager. It's going to help you with any sort of licensing issues that you may have, Windows licensing, Oracle licensing, and so forth. So again, sort of centralizing that. Amazon trying to take something from one of their large competitors, whether it's a Microsoft or Oracle or somebody else, and trying to make that an embedded service that is there in your Amazon console. All right, so a lot of lower level infrastructure things that we just covered: databases, storage, compute, enterprise architect stuff. Now we're going to get into some of the more complicated things. We're going to talk about machine learning, and as would be expected, lots and lots in the machine learning space. So first and foremost, a whole new set of free machine learning training is available now for data scientists, programmers, and so forth. All of that is now freely available. The first one that's in the sort of technology space is what's called Amazon Elastic Inference. So Amazon Elastic Inference, which is GPU-powered deep learning inference accelerator. So essentially what this is Amazon spent a lot of time kind of explaining the parts of machine learning and AI and so forth. This is you built your model. You want to now go apply it to a set of compute nodes, but maybe you don't really know what compute nodes or how big the compute node should be, or did I pick the one that's too big or too small? This will now do some elastic some rescaling, if you will, of what instance you pick and apply it to your model. And if your model changes over time, we'll try and help with that. So that sort of fits in the I don't really know what I need category. Can you help me, if you will? The next one. And this is in the list of a lot of things around this technology called SageMaker, which is their way of trying to make machine learning simpler for people. So the first one is called Ground Truth, SageMaker Ground Truth. And this is really looking at how to build highly accurate data sets and label them. So this is instead of manually labeling your data sets, this is trying to help automate labeling your data sets as you're building your data models. The next one in the SageMaker list is something called SageMaker RL, reinforced learning. So apparently there are 3 different types of learning. There's supervised learning, there's unsupervised learning, and then there's reinforced learning. And so this is a managed service for reinforced learning for AI and machine learning data sets. There was something called Amazon SageMaker Neo, which is what they call a run once, run anywhere type of model. So for the situation where you have one data set, you get one chance to run that, but you want to run it anywhere, maybe on an edge computing device or some small node. There's a managed service for that. The other thing they did was something called Deep Racer, which is their way of trying to make some of the SageMaker reinforced learning things sort of fun. So you're able to build programming models around these race cars, these small race cars, and they're going to have some programs that go on throughout the year to look for the best models and so forth, assuming that a lot of this is going to be eventually baked into things like highly automated vehicles and autonomous driving and things that might help Amazon down the road, like automated deliveries for Prime and so forth. So Deep Racer is sort of a fun way through cars and racing to embed some of that SageMaker RL technology. Next thing is Amazon machine learning algorithms and models are now available in the marketplace. So there's an ability for people to be able to build models and put them in the marketplace and potentially sell them and things out there. So lots of stuff around SageMaker, Ground Truth, RL, Deep Learning, or Deep Racer and Neo. And then the marketplace now has machine learning models as well. So a lot going on in that space. Not a space that I have a ton of background in. Go check out our friend Sam Charrington's show, This Week in Machine Learning. You'll learn a lot from over there. Now, the next category we have is serverless. Obviously, we cover serverless somewhat. What used to be the serverless cache shows, we still sort of blend them into the cloud cache shows now. And obviously, serverless has moved from Lambda as a concept and a whole ecosystem to a lot of different things that are sort of embedding the concept of serverless. I don't want to have to plan for things. I don't want to manage infrastructure. I don't want to think about scaling. Just sort of do those for me, Amazon. So a lot of things in this category. The first one is something called AWS Amplify Console. So if you are somewhat familiar with something like Netlify, which allows you to do continuous deployment and hosting services for modern web applications, so your single web page, single page applications, or any of that with serverless backend, this is now a service, AWS Amplify Console, which I suspect competes with Netlify quite a bit. The next one is there's a concept called step functions, which has been around for a couple of years now, or at least a year or so. Basically is a kind of a blueprinting model for thinking about how do I build the state machines that go with individual functions. In the past, these were always around Lambda, and they're now bringing in additional AWS services that can be incorporated into step functions. So step functions no longer just have to be about Lambda or API Gateway. They can now include other AWS services. So again, them very much building an ecosystem for how developers should think about serverless, but recognizing that there will be other services that need to be tightly integrated in order to make certain applications work. In the past, one of the things that Amazon did, they bought a company called Cloud9, which did an IDE, programming IDE. Obviously, they want to make it easier and easier for people to easily build serverless applications, Lambda applications in particular. And so they did a bunch of plugins for popular IDEs around tools to help it make it easier to build serverless Lambda applications. So around PyCharm, IntelliJ, and Visual Studio Code all have new plugins from Amazon to make it easier to build Lambda functions within the language that you love. People ask all the time, when will Lambda support more languages? So they added a bunch of new languages. Ruby got added, a couple of others got added, and they also built a new framework or a new service that allows you to do a bring your own. So if you and some community people want to get together and build some language support for whatever for Lambda, there's now a framework to be able to do that in sort of a bring your own language. The other concept that they introduced was they said a lot of times you will want to reuse certain things, certain Lambda functions in different applications or throughout your applications. So there's now more of a how to reuse and share functions concept within the Lambda framework and programming languages and step functions and so forth. So again, trying to make it simpler and simpler to be able to build Lambda applications, serverless applications. All right, what else? The last one, and this is the last category and the last part of this show, and we've been going for a while, so hopefully if you're still listening, that's cool. If not, no problem. The last one is sort of the category that I'll call Amazon's the first customer. And this is, in my opinion, Amazon, the company, has decided, hey, we're getting into some new businesses, and we've all seen them getting into lots of different areas. And we are going to have to go build some technology to be successful there. And then over time, they realize, oh, maybe we could make this technology more generally available. So the first one, and this probably surprised some people, but they also probably thought this is weird for an IT show, something called Amazon Ground Station, which is a managed satellite ground station service. So in essence, them going and saying, hey, if you have, you have satellites and you want to make it simpler to be able to get your data from those satellites back to ground and then be able to have application developers work with those, we will manage those we will manage the ground stations. And because they have lots of physical presences around the world, whether those are POPs or data centers, it allows them to reuse their backbone network. It allows them to reuse potentially land facilities and right-of-ways and other things that Amazon already has. So I think this is a building block for something else, some other things that are going on. They announced something called AWS Elemental Media Connect. Obviously, Amazon has been making investments around video as a company for a while. They offer video through Prime. They have really popular services like Twitch, and there's lots of rumors about them potentially wanting to get more and more into certain live things like sports. Obviously, we've seen them, Amazon, the company, do stuff with the NFL and host the Thursday night game on Amazon Prime. There was talk about them bidding for about 22 regional sports networks here in the U.S. You have to imagine those types of things would come up around the world as well. And so if Amazon's offering a ingest and distribution service for video, and then you marry that with ground station service with video. You have to sort of imagine that this is, those are the building blocks are already in place for Amazon, the company, to start doing things like going after, regional sports or e-games, esports or other types of things that might be live or would benefit from video distribution. So those two services are available as managed services. We know that Amazon is trying very hard to be in different parts of the healthcare industry. They're doing it through partnerships. They're beginning to expand out in that space. They introduced a managed service called Amazon Comprehend Medical, which is natural learning processing for healthcare applications, or natural language processing, NLP, natural language processing for healthcare applications. So you can imagine lots of different applications where, people want to talk to doctors, people want to talk to nurses. You've got the, intersection between regular human beings who don't know anything about medical, and you've got doctors who, have to be able to explain things maybe in multiple languages. This obviously is going to become a service that will help translate that, transcribe those things, and, you start to get into some very interesting remote medical types of healthcare situations. The next one is something called AWS RoboMaker, which is a new service to help develop, test, deploy, manage robotics applications. So at some point when Skynet happens and the robots take over all of our jobs, Amazon wants to make sure that they're part of that as well. Obviously, Amazon does a ton of work with robots in their warehouse and distribution factories. You can imagine other companies around the world are doing more and more with robots, whatever the application might be. They don't all have to be manufacturing or warehouses. Amazon wants to be sort of the central place where people can manage and develop those applications and influence those standards around that. So RoboMaker is a new service around building robotics applications. And the last one is something that, again, Amazon's done for a very long time. Amazon has always been world renowned for doing recommendations when you're buying things on Amazon.com. There is now something called Amazon Personalize, which allows recommendation services to be a managed service for different companies. So you can imagine somebody saying, well, if I'm a startup company, I know I want to make recommendations as part of what I do. It'd be great if I could be able to use a service like Amazon has for retail for whatever I'm doing. Maybe I'm a dating app or maybe I'm whatever. You can leverage the power of their decades of expertise in doing recommendation engines. So with that, I don't know how many new services I went through. I tried to classify them for you. I will put some things in the show notes so that you can go back and look at all of these things. But hopefully this was somewhat useful. I know for me, it was a good homework exercise to try and figure all these things out, try and figure out what they are, what they do. And hopefully this show has been useful for you. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. As always, folks, thanks for listening. This is sort of a special show on a Saturday. Thanks for listening as always, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.